China and the United States are expected to hold one or two more rounds of trade talks to map out a plan to end their tariff war before the March 1 deadline, according to a diplomatic source and observers. The assessment came as representatives from both nations in Washington were due to start 2 days of negotiations on Wednesday, where China was expected to respond to a series of demands made by the U.S. in a previous round of talks in early January. The Chinese delegation led by Vice Premier Liu He arrived in Washington on Tuesday, where the delegation held an internal preparatory meeting. Negotiations with the U.S. delegations, headed by U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, were expected to last all day on Wednesday, ending with a dinner. The negotiations are expected to be wrapped up on Thursday afternoon, according to a source familiar with the arrangement. Both sides have agreed on a March 1 deadline for the current round of negotiations, following talks between Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Donald Trump in Argentina at the start of December. China agreed to buy more American products, but the U.S. is also demanding that China stop forced technology transfer and cyber intrusion. A diplomatic source said 2 more rounds of talks would be needed before March 1, the deadline agreed by Trump and Xi. After that passes, Trump has threatened to raise tariffs on $200 billion of U.S. imports from 10% to 25%. It is not yet known whether the U.S. would immediately raise tariffs if its demands are not fully satisfied, but the source said it was possible that the U.S. would suspend the tariff increase for a longer period while pressing China for verification that it is delivering on its promises. Chinese team arrives in U.S. under shadow of Huawei charges. Lu Weidong, a U.S. affairs expert at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, said both sides would need more talks over the next 30 days, and an acceptable framework or deal was only likely to be reached at the last minute. Any agreement could be a framework for further suspending tariff increases rather than a final conclusion to the trade war, he added. China will not accept all demands by the U.S. and make full concessions. There are likely be some adjustments or another deadline. The talks will continue and you cannot expect to solve all the issues at once, he said. It is easier to make progress on intellectual property protection and cybersecurity, but will be difficult to handle issues about subsidies to state-owned enterprises. Latest trade talks came after the U.S. announced indictment against Chinese telecom giant Huawei and confirmed it would seek the extradition of its chief financial officer Sabrina Meng Wanzhou. A U.S. business representative warned that the legal case should not become entangled with the trade talks. It is important to keep in mind how the U.S. law enforcement system works. In general, our Department of Justice does not consult with other agencies when it's planning to pursue legal action. Aaron Ennis, senior vice president with the U.S.-China Business Council, said. U.S. and China, miles and miles from trade resolution, says Wilbur Ross. Ennis continued that she expected negotiators to focus on the long-standing trade issues that have prevented a resolution of the dispute, including structural economic reforms such as strengthening China's protections of intellectual property and eliminating requests for companies to transfer their technology to Chinese firms as the price of gaining access to China's markets. Ryan Hass, a David M. Rubenstein Fellow at the Brookings Institution think tank, said that negotiating a deal by the end of Liu's visit this week had never been on the cards. He argued that this meant that the timing of the latest indictment against Huawei was not likely to affect the time frame for the talks, but he said the high-profile announcement of a range of charges against the tech giant may end up raising the asking price of what the Chinese believe they need to secure from negotiations in order to demonstrate to a domestic audience that they achieved an equitable and fair deal.